Hey, welcome back, everybody. It's time again for Health Talks with Dr. Trinh. The one show, maybe the only show that shows you the path to a healthier life, one conversation at a time. And today, well, it may not be our physical bodies we're going to look at, but how do we get our house in order? How do we get our affairs in order? How do we plan for this ride we call the next chapter here? How do we prepare for all that? A man who has a bunch of credentials is going to help us figure it out. Welcome, if you will, Mark Fitter. Did I get that name right here?
You got it correct, my friend. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Okay. Well, you look fitter than I do here today. I got my old grandsons gave me. I got a couple little grandsons, and they call me. Well, they actually don't call me Papa. They call me Baca because my first grandson couldn't say. I know he spit that out, and I said, "I'll take it. Sounds better than Grandpa. Anything sounds better than Grandpa here." So they call me Baca here, and I'm amazed at how many of my friends who have grandchildren now similarly don't want to be called Grandpa. Are we still just the baby boom that wants to pretend we're forever young? I can't be a grandpa. I can't be a grandfather here. I got to be something else than that. Is that, I don't know if you're a grandparent or not here, but that's a common theme I hear these days here. I love the idea of being a grandpa. I just don't want to be called a grandpa. I don't want to be old.
Yeah, that's great.
So one of the things that comes with getting older, this next chapter in life here, is I got to start thinking about making some plans. I got to have some sort of estate. I got to figure out retirement. I got to figure out houses and other sorts of things here, all these kinds of things. I'm still mentally, look at the way I dress. I wear a T-shirt and a hat. I'm still 30 in my head here. I'm not ready for all these conversations. Help us walk through some of these things here today, because you are what? You're an attorney that does estate law and a real estate broker and a couple other things, I guess.
Yeah, I got a few things in the offering. So I actually practice in the areas of estate law, which involves preparing trusts and wills and medical directives, power of attorney, those type of documents. And also in the area of trust administration. So if someone passes or becomes incapacitated, we work with the successor trustee to help them administer the trust and the assets. And then probate, which we hope people don't go into, and we need to talk about that at some point today, how to avoid probate because it's expensive and very time consuming. Then I also practice in the area of business representation law. So I help people form and maintain entities, LLCs, corporations, such like that. And then also practice in the area of real estate law. So any type of transaction, conveyances, any sort of contract work with a subspecialty in contracts. Also a real estate broker. So I list and sell properties for a lot of clients. Sometimes it's more convenient and can even save costs if I wind up listing the property for them as well. And then they're just dealing with me as their attorney and their real estate broker. So kind of a package deal for people that are interested.
Well, I'm sure that's why Dr. Trinh brought you on today. The majority of his audience are older, like me. We're all worried about our health and how we're going to avoid what I saw my parents, my sad parents go through in their later days, an ultimate death and demise, where they got old, where they got invalid, where they got dementia, where they got all these kinds of things that just didn't sound like the last ride was worth it here, you know. And so my generation looks at this, that's not going to happen to me. I'm going to be better prepared. I'm just not going to do it. I remember my father, as he got older and suffered from so many different problems. He had strokes. He had all sorts of problems, cancer and other sorts of things. And I'd look at him laughing and I said, I'm not going to do this, Dad. And he laughed and said, like, you get a choice. I said, I'm just not going to do this. I don't know why you guys agree to do all this stuff. I'm just not going to do it. He said, what's the alternative? I said, I don't know. And then I would just cover up my head and I say, I just don't want to hear about it. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to think about it here. But I'm not going through that. My mother had Parkinson's, which led to dementia and all sorts of other stuff. So I've seen the whole gamut of everything that's here. And the one thing I will credit my father for, because he was a World War II, generation, the greatest generation. He was a bomber pilot in World War II, in fact, is that he was prepared. He didn't go blindly into the darkness here. What's the famous quote? The I'm Irish, so I got it. It's Welsh, but it's kind of saying Dylan Thomas, "Don't go gently into that dark, cold night. Rage against the dying light. Don't accept what's coming. Fight it." And in my generation, don't even face it. We're baby boomers. We can't even say the word death anymore. It's passed away. We lost Uncle Joe. Where did we lose him? At the 7-Eleven? We can't even acknowledge. I still say, this is my common rant, we're the Peter Pan generation. We're never going to grow up, and we're never going to get old. And yet, let's face it, here I am. I'm past my mid-60s now here. And I have grandchildren and stuff here. So is it time for us to wake up and start to get real about what's really ahead here?
Yeah. So thank you. Excuse me. Thank you so much for sharing, because I think you hit the nail on the head, right? We don't want to think about it, but it's coming, right? We're getting older. And since I oversee all the trust administration and probate at our law firm, I deal with the kids who come in and say, yeah, mom and dad just, weren't prepared. And now we got to go through probate.
Right.
Or maybe even worse, mom or dad didn't have any documents in proper order, and now they are incapacitated. Yeah. So what do we do about that?
Right. So let me dissect some of those. I'm going to share a lot of personal stories here today, because I'm the poster child for what you're looking for here. I've gone through it all, and yet you would think I'd be so smart. I'm not any more prepared probably than I feared they were. My parents were prepared. They were of that generation where they thought about this stuff a lot. I didn't think about it, and still don't. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. What am I waiting for here? Why am I still afraid to face this stuff? Is it cost? Is it just I'll put it off till later? What do you see? Why do people put it off?
Yeah. So I think that when you talk about planning for the future, incumbent is that I am getting older. I may become incapacitated. And reality is I am going to die someday.
I'm going to die. There, you said the words right there. We spit it out. Am I going to die? No, I'm going to live forever.
Right. So it's interesting, because we often think of these plans and preparing should be for older people, but really they're probably as important or more important for young families. And here's why. Let's say we have a young family, and maybe you have children, and obviously you have grandchildren.
Right.
So God forbid, what happens if something happens to them?
And somebody pointed that out to me years ago, and I didn't even want to face that. What if I died? Who would take care of my daughter? Yeah.
Exactly. And so, again, because I oversee the after death, and just to let you know, I come from a background that I feel prepared me for this. So I was actually a pastor for many years.
Oh, okay.
Becoming an attorney. And while I was in law school, I was a hospice chaplain.
There you go.
So it's kind of funny. When I was younger, I told God, I said, I'll do anything but work with old people and sick people.
God had other plans. God said, well, maybe I'll let you do that.
Yeah, I become a hospice chaplain, and that's all I dealt with. And so much of my day today is dealing with adult children whose parents have passed. Right. But let's take younger families just for a moment. We're going to talk about older folks primarily. Right. But let's say you have a young family with children. God forbid they both become incapacitated or die. What happens to the children? Well, you have to ask the question, if there's grandparents on both sides, do they get along?
Yeah.
And who would get the children?
Right.
Because the last thing you want is for mom and dad to be gone, and all of a sudden grandma and grandpa on both sides, or papa or whoever we're calling them.
That's right.
Papa, yeah, are now in court fighting, and while that's happening, the kids are in a foster care system.
Yes, right.
So, I mean, if you're a young family, and just a little side note, like David and I, who are partners, in the firm, we have a huge heart for young people and kids. And so we actually have a special opportunity for young families to do a very inexpensive estate plan for them. And it's, obviously we're a for-profit business, but in our heart, it's kind of part of a ministry for us. We want to reach out and help these young families be prepared. because if not, and something tragic happens, then it just becomes much, much worse when all of a sudden these babies or little children are sort of left to the court system. And
Right.
I don't think there's a parent alive today who wants their kids in foster care as opposed to being with a loving grandma or grandpa.
No.
So just a side note there too.
And I'm guilty of that too. So I have one daughter who's married with two small children now. Here, one's 3 and one just turned 9. And occasionally I said to him, "What happened if something happens to you, Dad? Dad, we got a million things to worry about. That's not one of them." No, that should be, because what would happen to those two children? His parents, his family, our family, some family. I don't know. I really don't know. It's one of those things you don't want to think about, and so you don't face. But it doesn't take much to figure this out. For them to establish some contingency should the worst happen here. I don't know why we don't hesitate getting insurance. We don't
Right.
hesitate doing other things that to plan for some of these unfortunate things. I have car insurance, I have home insurance, life insurance, those kinds of things. Why don't we have some of the legalities figured out in our lives? It can't be that hard. It can't be. Is it expensive? I don't even know what. Is it?
No, it's not expensive at all. And another thought on the young parents passing or becoming incapacitated. Sometimes you have grandparents who live in other states, right, or other countries. So could you imagine if you're a grandparent and maybe your daughter-in-law, son-in-law, parents live, you're in California maybe, but maybe they're in New York or
Right.
Idaho,
Right.
or, any other country, right? And all of a sudden, maybe the court says, yeah, we're going to award them temporary custody. All of a sudden, these grandkids you're seeing every day, every week are now, thousands of miles away, possibly.
Right.
So,
And I can imagine all sorts of horror stories. One of the things that struck me, I've lost both of my parents both of my parents have long since died, and my wife's parents have long since died. And there was I'm an only child, so there was no big fight or anything that went on. But and I don't want to make it seem the worst, but my wife has 2 sisters, and there was a lot of disagreement. There was a lot of, everybody was upset when Mom died, the last one to die, and who gets the dishes and who gets this and what would she want, and there was a lot of disagreement because Mom never sat down and figured it all out. And so everybody was guessing what Mom wanted. And at the moment when they're supposed to be hugging and embracing, there was a lot of anger and tension over silly, stupid stuff. Because everybody's trying to do the right thing, and everybody's sure they know the answer. What do you mean she didn't want that? She would never do that. That's not what she wanted. And
yeah,
stupid stuff.
it can be a very difficult time. And just sort of catapulting off of this initial topic, one of the things Dr.Trinh will talk about a lot is people today are generally living longer, and so there's a higher percentage of incapacity.
Yes.
Dementia, Alzheimer's. And so what happens if mom or dad become incapacitated? And incapacitated is kind of a fancy legal word which says you're not allowed to contract.
Right.
You cannot contract. So what happens at that point? Well, if there's no documents already in place, basically your option is to try and get a conservatorship.
Right.
And it's sort of the cousin to probate. It's expensive and time consuming. Mm-hmm. So if you have your documents in place ahead of time, so when we do an estate plan, it involves, includes your trust, your will, community property agreement, medical directives, your durable power of attorney, which, is effective while you're alive. Once you pass, that document's obsolete.
Right.
But those are very important because you've already said that here's my durable power of attorney. If I become incapacitated, this person takes over.
Right.
And it's important that the document is drafted correctly to include everything you want it to include, right? Mm-hmm. So just pulling something off the internet, probably not a good idea. I've had some clients that come in that kind of do your own thing. And at least in my experience, it has become on occasion more expensive for them because what they did, they're not, what they've done oftentimes turns out not to be a very good preparation. And oftentimes fixing a problem is more expensive than doing the job
So let me
originally.
stop you there and let me give you just, again, I'm going to give you lots of real work. You're flooding my mind with examples from my life and from friends I've seen and people that have come into this show or other shows on our network here. We're also not just living longer. We're living in multiple marriages, perhaps. I'm not,
Mhm.
but most people have. It's not uncommon. What, 50% of people in America get divorced, and so there's a high percentage of people that maybe there's two or three spouses, maybe there's a couple families involved in this thing, and maybe they don't all get along because that wasn't a real wonderful occurrence in their life here, and lots of things can happen. I'll give you a classic example. We had Casey Kasem's daughter on, the famous Casey Kasem, the DJ, and he'd been married several times, and his last wife was very protective, and there was a lot of money involved. And according to the daughter, as Casey was got incapacitated before he died, and before he didn't really know what was going on anymore. This is just from Casey Kasem's daughter's perspective. I've never had the wife on to discuss from her perspective, but the daughter felt like she was playing hide my dad. And she'd literally moved around the country into different facilities and stuff here, so she couldn't see him. They'd been estranged, and now she was trying to get back together, and the wife's like, no, you just want the money, and and all this. There was a lot of contention going on there, and she literally had to fight after her dad died. I think she got some laws passed that gave children from the first marriage rights to see their father and visit. Maybe not defining who gets what, but just access. Because I believe, just about every state jurisdiction, maybe this is true, you can enlighten us, whoever the current wife is, she controls, while he's still alive, she controls the husband and what happens with him. Is that true? Is that...
Not necessarily. Again, depends on the estate plan you create, because you can make your daughter your power of attorney, your medical power of attorney, your real estate power of attorney. And so if you become incapacitated, wife is there. But if your child is your power of attorney, and even your HIPAA, right? Who are you going to name on HIPAA? Sometimes doctors, I've had families come in to say the doctor wouldn't even talk to me because my name wasn't on the HIPAA.
Yeah, right.
On the HIPAA page. And so creating an estate plan to me is essential in California, because we think about the finances, but it's also the emotional part.
Exactly.
What is going to happen? Who's going to have the right to say you're going to stay at home, you're going to go in a facility?
Right. So she was arguing that she didn't get a chance to see her dad or visit her dad.
Right.
You two separated a long time. The wife says, he doesn't want to see you. Well, how do you know? I want to make up with my dad. I do want to see him. No, you're just out after the money or whatever here. And there's big debates and so they're arguing over this kind of stuff, and they're providing it. And the dad is long since lost, awareness of maybe even who he is or what's going on or something. And everybody's fighting over these things. Lots of fighting going on. Some of it's money. Some of it just brings out all these underlying feelings that have been there for a while. And some of it is just everybody's got a disagreement over what should happen and who should call the shots here. And nobody knows.
Yeah. And so, again, if you have your estate plan in place and properly prepared, you can avoid virtually all of these issues, right? I mean, you're still going to have personality conflicts,
right,
and that's going to be difficult to overcome once mom or dad passes, but you can help head that off. And, I would say that in my experience, every family with whom we deal would say that, hey, when I pass, I want my assets to go where I want them to go as quickly as possible.
Right.
Right.
And not to the government necessarily. No, I'm not anti-government, but I didn't make this, whatever I made, to give half of it or a bunch of it away to attorneys or to taxes or to other things. Let's figure out a way to.
Exactly. David and I tell people that all the time, that we want to help get this done as expeditiously as possible for you. Sometimes there's not an option because there's so much bad blood between siblings that, we may be representing the trustee or a beneficiary. And, if we're representing the trustee, sometimes the beneficiaries will decide to get their own attorney, and, a fight can ensue. And we just think, mom and dad probably didn't want that. They probably wanted this money and these assets to go to you directly. and not just paying attorneys, who wants to fund a fight between their kids when they're gone? I mean, that's the last thing you want to happen with your money and with your family.
And who does that benefit? Except, I'm sorry, the attorneys out there who are going to run up fees and drain a lot of this stuff. I have seen that happen. I've seen it happen in divorces. I've seen it happen in all sorts of things where there's something has happened, and now we have to decide what happens to this money in this estate. And whoever built that estate, one or more people, the last thing they wanted to do was get in a fight and see it dissipated, and see it spread out, and see it wasted.
Well, you brought up a good point about multiple marriages too, right? We see a lot of that. And so what happens with, the kids from the first marriage? What do they get? How about the second marriage or even third and beyond marriage, right? Even a greater reason to have your estate plan in place, because you can outline that specifically, who's getting what. So one of the things you can do in a trust is we have schedules at the back of a trust, right? We have individual property, and then we have what we call community property. So for instance, let's say dad was married, maybe did fairly well, has some assets, got divorced, or maybe even his wife passed. Then gets remarried, and new wife has kids of her own. So what's going to happen to those assets, right? And maybe dad says, I'd really like, my son, to have this amount of money or this house that I had. And I'd like daughter to make sure she gets these trinkets from mom and those type of things. All of that can be outlined. So in the schedule, at the back of the trust, we'll put husband, individual property, wife, individual property schedule, and then community property. And in the trust, we designate who's getting what and when they're getting it. We also provide a personal memorandum, which you can fill out on your own. You don't have to keep coming back to our office. But for instance, you may have personal property that's very special. You might have a ring that you want to go to a granddaughter.
Yeah, exactly.
Or a little, Hot Wheel collection. You want to go to your grandson.
I have a Hot Wheel collection. You nailed it. You're talking to me today here, right?
Yeah, you may want that to go to one your child or to one of your grandchildren, right? So if you don't specify that, then it's going to get distributed based on what we call the residue of your estate, typically, whatever your will looks like or your trust. So those type of things are just very important.
And not to keep hitting money, but as we live longer, our houses go up in value. There's more money at stake that we're playing with here. This isn't. Two things struck me. My father-in-law didn't have much money. And so when he died, I thought there's not going to be much debate or discussion here. But what little he had, it did bring out kind of tensions between the sisters and back to where they'd been, and feelings about, they didn't always, they're sisters and they love each other, but there was lots of fights and tensions through the years, like all sisters would be, I guess. And it brought a lot of that back on. I thought, what are we fighting over? We're fighting over a blanket or a ring or some other little thing here. Who gets this? And, I was amazed at that because I don't have any siblings. So that must be more common than I think it is, because it also brings out all this, whatever has been underlying there for a long time. It's sort of one of these moments of truth again here that brings everybody together and brings to the surface all this unresolved stuff here.
Yeah, I mean, you have to realize that I don't think anyone's prepared to lose their parents, no matter what your age is. I lost mine when I was fairly young, but I deal with people in their 20s and people in their 70s. Yeah. And all in between who have lost parents. Right. And it's just different. All of a sudden, mom's gone, dad's gone. What prepares you for that? Nothing. So there's a lot of emotion. And sometimes there's remorse because maybe they didn't treat mom or dad the way they should have, or maybe they broke the relationship several years ago. Right. And now, what can I do to try to fix that? And sometimes there's this kind of afterthought of, I feel bad about how I treated mom or dad. So now I'm gonna make it up to them by, doing this or this. And all of a sudden, the other kids are like, wait a minute, you weren't even in mom's life. Now you're fighting us. Yeah. And so,
where were you the last 10 years when we was wiping dad's butt here and doing all these other things and putting up with all his problems? Yeah, no. This is I'm owed this. You get none of this, or you got no say in this. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, kind of goes back to my, previous occupation as a pastor and chaplain. I feel it really prepared me to help people through these situations. So I do a lot of counseling.
Mhm.
It's when you get me, you get a blend of attorney, pastor's heart, and real estate broker. So you kind of the whole package.
Weird kind of combination here. I don't see those three together here, but I can see
They
the.
put it, yeah, they go together really well, surprisingly, because I have to deal with the legal issues to make sure things get handled properly and the terms of the trust are followed and such like that. So you want that, but I think also people want someone that has a heart that is not, when your parent just passed, your spouse just passed. I don't think you want a cold factual, just the facts, do this, do this. I think you want someone you can look into their eyes and know they understand your hurt and they understand you as a person, and you're not just a number, you're not just a client, but you're a human being who's hurting.
And you're acting emotionally, so you may not even be acting rationally. It may not even make sense to you, but it's just what I feel right now, and damn it, I'm going to do this. And it's not it's an emotional time. So you revert to an emotional state, and maybe that in retrospect, if you were calm and cool and collected, you might not make the same decisions or choose to have the same arguments.
Sure, a client may come into the office just having an argument with a spouse or with a sibling, and come in and say, I definitely want to do this. And we're not order takers. Our job is to observe, assess, analyze not just the legal component, but also the emotional component as to where they're at. And if you sense someone's very upset and they says, okay, I want to cut all my kids out, I want to just give everything to my wife.
Right.
And say, okay, I mean, you definitely have a choice to do that. But if you know the client well enough, is that really what they're wanting right now? Are we gonna make that change right now? And then you're gonna go out and get an accident and that day and be happy you made that decision.
Yeah.
So obviously we want to follow the client's wishes, but we're not order takers. We're not just producing documents. We're truly counselors at law, and we're counselors in general. And so yeah, you want to do that? We'll prepare that for you, and we'll send it to you to review, at least to give you a day or two to kind of look at it, cool off, and see if that's really what you want to do.
So we're talking about not just a logical plan so that it doesn't get sucked up in litigation, doesn't take years to go through probate, doesn't all do all these things here. There's all those logical reasons to do this. There's a lot of emotional reasons, it sounds like.
Because generally, if you have two kids, so often they're polar opposites. And if you have 3 or 4 kids, you got a couple on each side.
Right.
And so when mom and dad pass, it's not like those personalities go away. They become intensified. And so a well-established estate plan will help your children maybe get closer and save costs when you pass, as opposed to a poorly drafted plan or no plan that likely would have them exacerbating their differences and their conflict and costing money. So you'd asked earlier the costs of this, right? I can't speak for other firms. At our firm, basically, if you're a couple and there's not multiple marriages and there's not multiple properties, probably looking at around $2,500 to do the estate plan.
Okay.
To me, it's just a bargain. Right. We've actually been told that our pricing is too low, but we don't want to raise it at this point because we really have a passion to help people.
Okay.
If you're single and it's a simple plan, it's probably $2,000. If you are a young married family, and there are some stipulations to this, but if you're young married and maybe only have a couple of kids or something like that, or a few children, we have a young family package we do, and it's everything that the $2,500 plan is, but it's $1,000.
Wow.
And it's basically to say, hey, we care about little kids and babies, and we want to make sure that your children go where you want them to go if something happens to you.
I got to talk to my daughter about that because I bug her about that sometimes, and she's like, "Dad, I got a million things. I got to pick up my kid in 20 minutes. I got soccer practice or whatever. I don't have time to worry about this." Yeah, make the time, because the last thing we want to be doing is it's all of these things you hope will never happen, you think will never happen, but should they happen, Oh my goodness, you're just in the middle. So I'll give you some other examples. We're gonna scare everybody into doing this here. Maybe even myself. I'm gonna scare myself into doing this here. So my late father, big tough guy, stroke, no problem. Heart bypass, easy. Cancer, I got it beat. He falls and hits his head. He's pulling a loaf of bread out of the refrigerator and it gets stuck because it's frozen, and he yanks on it and falls backward and hits his head on the counter, and that's eventually what kills him. He ends up, his brain swells. He goes into, they find him on the floor. His girlfriend comes in and finds him on the floor. They take him to the hospital. He's been like that for a while. And I get the call. It's a couple hours away. I go rushing out to Palm Springs area and Palm Desert. And the doctor says, what do you want to do? He's unconscious. His brain is swelling and everything. I said, give me my choices. I've been trained by my dad. Let's get logical. I'm shocked, but let's get logical. Well, we can operate immediately and reduce the hematoma, the whatever it's called, the swelling of the brain, and he'll almost certainly be blind. Or we can just let it go and he'll almost certainly die. I said, what's choice number 3? And they said, what do you want to do? And they said, and by the way, is there a, show us this living will or testament, whatever you call all these things. I had a power of attorney, so I could make a decision. He had done that. But I didn't know. I want to wake him up and say, Dad, what do I do? What do you want to do? And I can't. So I'm like, well, what would you do? Oh, no, I can't tell you. You got 30 seconds to decide, does your dad go blind or die? And I fumbled, and I said, I'm not sure. Let me go think about it. And in that moment, he started to recover, and I thought, thank you, Dad, you saved me. It turned out to be a roller coaster over the next month or two, and eventually he did die. And he died in a way that I know he didn't want to die, that I was determined not to have happen for him and for me. I kept taking him off the do not resuscitate list because it looked like he was going to survive. And then I'd take him off, and all of a sudden he'd get worse, and I'd put him back on again here. And one of the moments when it looked like he'd come out of it, and hallelujah, the happy days are here, he has a heart attack. And now he is a vegetable. There's no brain activity, and they can't. I had taken him off the do not resuscitate, so they resuscitated him. And now he's there with, just no brain activity. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I did exactly what he didn't want to do because I kept screwing around on and off and on and off. And eventually I had to go in, and we had to literally, as they say, pull the plug and sit there and watch my father die. Today's the day. Horrible thing to go through and get all choked up thinking about it. Long since stopped beating myself up about it, but I'm trying to do the best. I'm trying to honor his wishes, but I didn't know. And part of it is, even if I did know, I knew he didn't want to go out like that. I'm trying to do the best I can. I want my dad to live. I want him to survive. I don't want, I'm not prepared to make these decisions, and yet I'm forced to make them. The more this stuff is spelled out, the more you'll know. And on a positive note, my father was so meticulous, so anal about everything. He had his entire funeral planned out, what music, what thing, and everything, down to the point he would tell me overly, because my dad's a good Irish Catholic, we're going to have a party afterwards. And he said, and I don't want you going cheap. I know you. You'll go cheap. You'll get the cheap booze. I want the good booze, and I want everybody to see it. I want you to display it and these things. So, and I laugh, and I told everybody at the wake, at the funeral, at the after party, whatever you want to call it, this story here. And I said, but the good news is I knew exactly what to do. Once my father passed, I'm upset. I can't make decisions. I did a poor job trying to decide, do I take him on, put him on or off this do not resuscitate. I didn't play that game right. But I got one chance to honor his wishes, to remember him, to do what he wanted, to be the good son. And by God, I was, because I did exactly what he wanted. And there was a certain relief in not having to figure out, I don't know, was there a casket or no casket? Is this or that? So many of these things get thrown at you, and you're like, I don't know. And when someone's figured it all out, it makes it a hell of a lot easier. I can just tell you that from personal experience.
Yeah, I thank you so much for sharing that story because that really is important, right? What's going to happen? Do you want heroic efforts, basically, to try to bring it back?
That's what I did.
And that's actually one of the questions on the medical directives that we prepare. And so clients have an opportunity when they're total capacity, when they can think about it, maybe even talk to their kids, talk to their spouse. What do we want in this situation? And so they can dictate that up front, which to me is a huge gift to the kids because it's hard on the kids to know, what would mom or dad want, or my spouse in this situation. Right. I want to do the right thing, but gosh, that's a heavy burden, to make that decision in that moment. I mean, like you said, you have 30 seconds.
30 seconds, live or die, up or down. What do you want? Yeah.
Live or die. And so one of the gifts we can give to our kids, because I know, by and large, most people love their kids and want the best for them.
By and large, yes, most of the time.
There are some situations where there's conflict, but think about that right now. If, let's say it's happening right now. Yeah. Would you want to look at your daughter or your son and say, you decide if I live or die?
No.
My gosh, that's, and then they might wind up living with that burden the rest of their life.
Exactly.
I feel bad because I did exactly what mom or dad didn't want it. Didn't want it. And
that's
so
what I still kind of struggle with. I tried to be the right thing, and in my effort to overthink it and to over heroic effort here, because it's also, this is a horrible analogy, but we've all had pets, or at least I've had lots of pets, and we had to put them to sleep. And at some point in time, in the first pet I went through, I kept that poor pet alive for 6 months, limping along everything I could try. And the pet's like, let me go. I'm dying. I'm dead. But I can't. Am I keeping them alive for them or for me? That's a real hard question.
Right.
Why are we doing this? Is it because I can't let go, or because that's really, I'm going to do every effort because I love them so much here? Maybe if you really love them, you'll let them go. I remember, I'll give you one other story. My late mother, I've shared this on this show many times, but my mother died many years before my dad died. Horrible. My mother was fun. She was the life of the party until she had Parkinson's and all that. Led to dementia. Last few years, miserable existence. She was so unhappy. She shook. She fell. She was frightened. She wasn't sure who she was anymore. It was horrible to watch. And she was in and out of the hospital dozens and dozens of times. She'd fall or things would happen, everything. The last time that she's in the hospital, we're sitting around, my dad and myself, and her sister was still alive. And my dad says, we're good Irish Catholics. Let's say a prayer for mom. And I looked at him. I said, Dad, what are we praying for? And he gave me this horrible look. And we're really praying for her. And I'm sorry, for my sake too, and for her sake. This is horrible. This isn't getting better. This isn't going anywhere. This is not what she wanted. This is not what I want. It's hard on all of us, and at some point you're just praying that they go quickly and end this thing. And that sounds horrible as a child to say, oh, well, suck it up. It's not about you. It's about them. It's about her, too. I saw the misery, and she'd look in my eyes and say, oh, my God, I can't live like this. Please, let me go.
So, I'm so glad you shared that, because that's such an important part. And believe it or not, it's kind of a small part of your estate plan. There's so much. But it's really a simple part of the estate plan that says, here's what I want. And it's hard to talk to your kids about that. Just sit down and go, hey, let's go to lunch. By the way, if this happens to me, pull the plug, or I don't want to live. So it's so much easier for you to just do that ahead of time. I want to transition a little bit, because I just want to give folks some information again about the evils of probate, because we hate to see people have to go through that.
Yeah, let's talk about it. I assume that everybody knows the evils of probate, but no, let's remind me here what the evils of probate. You die, there's no intestate, no will, no plan, no assurance, and there's multiple people involved, and maybe there's a house or two, and there's some other things here, and all of a sudden, what?
Well, actually, you'd be surprised. Most people don't know about probate. They know the term and they think they know about it, but here's the situation. So if you do not have a trust, and you go past the threshold in California of assets outside of a trust, you're going to go through probate. The fact that you have a will does not mean you don't go through probate. And people think, oh, if I have a will, there's no probate. No, exactly opposite, right? If you go past, doesn't matter if you have a will or not, if you don't have a trust, and in California, as of this year, you can have up to $184,500 outside of a trust outside of beneficiary designations and outside of co-owned assets, basically, and not have to go through probate. So, for instance, you may have $1 million life insurance policy with beneficiaries. No problem. You don't need a trust for that.
Right.
You don't need a will. It's going to go to beneficiaries, maybe an IRA with beneficiaries, such like that. Not a problem. You may have a checking account or savings account that child is co-owner on. Generally speaking, that's not an issue. If it's a huge amount and there's one sibling, you got $1 million in this checking account, and one son's on it, the other son's not. So the one son goes, "Well, it's all my money." Pretty good chance the other son's going to try to fight that. It'll be probably be a court battle.
Right. But there are instances where people, and my late aunt, my mother's sister was one of them. She was poor as a church mouse, as they used to say, didn't have much, just a little secretary in her life, didn't own a house, didn't have any kids, didn't get married. So when she died, I was basically her. There were a couple of cousins, but I was basically her closest relative. I took care of her in the last few years. And so she had put me on her checking account for whatever, a couple of $1,000s it was to pay the expenses and pay her bills. And she left me a car. And I was a co on that. So we didn't have to go through probate. We didn't have to do anything. I just went into the bank and said, "She's gone." And I went to the DMV and said, "She's gone." And I'm already listed on both assets. And it was pretty simple and pretty straightforward. There can't be a lot of those people, though, because in today's world, you got a house, you got anything, suddenly it's beyond that little simple.
Yeah. So here's the thing to remember, that when you're valuing for probate, it's based on gross value, not net. So if you own real estate in California, you're almost guaranteed, if you don't have a trust, you're going through probate, right? Mm-hmm. So you might have bought $1 million house and maybe you put down 10%. So you put down $100,000. And you go, a person dies. Well, it's just $100,000 in equity. That's it. No, it's based on the gross value of it. Mm. So if you have a will, the benefit to having a will is that you can pick your executor, your personal representative, right? Mm-hmm. You can pick that person. You can designate where your assets are going to go. But again, if the value is above 184.5 when you die of assets that don't have a co-owner, aren't in trust, don't have beneficiaries, you go through probate. Now, I can tell you at this point, right about now, probate's taking anywhere like from maybe 8 to 12 months to get through to be able to distribute assets to beneficiaries.
Meaning that bank account, nobody can touch it. That house, nobody can sell it. Those things are can't be moved, can't be changed until the ownership is established, right?
Well, sort of. It's not that it can't be sold, but we have to go to the court to get you assigned as personal representative. So when I'm talking 8 to 12 months, I'm talking about finishing, being able to actually distribute. Right. So maybe at months 4 or 5 or 6, we're selling the house, right? But it's not going to get distributed. We still have to go through and do a petition for final distribution and such like that. So very time consuming. It's expensive. So the court sets the fee schedule. The first $100,000 in assets, it's 4% to the attorney and 4% to the personal representative.
Wow. So 8% of that little estate, or whatever, good, big or small, is gone.
Of the first 100,000, it's 3% of the second 100,000 and 2% of the next 800,000 and 1% after that. So if you do the math, right? I mean, even if you only have 100, it wouldn't be 100,000 because you wouldn't have to go to probate. But let's say you have 200,000, right? So you're over the threshold of that. So 200,000, you're looking, if your personal representative takes their fee, you're looking at 8,000 for the first $100,000 and 6,000. So you're looking at 14,000 plus probably a couple thousand in court fees. So $16,000 for a $200,000 estate. You probably could have done your estate plan for $2,500.
Do the math.
And if you have an estate plan, there's usually a survivorship clause which says that my beneficiaries have to survive by 30 or 60 days. And people put that in just in case all of a sudden they're in an accident and they all die at the same time or within a short period of time. They want to make sure their assets go to the people they want it to go to and not automatically pass to that person's heirs. But if that happens, then there's $16,000, which you could have done so much less expensive. And again, once you pass the survivorship period, a lot of times we can start distributing assets. So it might be a month or 2 or 3, and we're distributing assets as opposed to maybe up to a year to start distributing. And there'll be a trust administration fee, but generally not nearly what probate costs.
Crazy.
$1 million house. You can imagine. Start doing the math, right? Two times 8 is 16,000, right? Double that for the personal representative, 32,000. Then add in the original money. What do you have? Maybe $50,000 or something like that. Not counting the fees to sell the property, the real estate commissions, and closing costs. So it's just so expensive to go through probate. By creating a good plan, and obviously our firm is available to do that. Doesn't have to be us. It's a law firm that you trust and you're confident in. Creating that is going to save, I think, anxiety for your children. It's going to help prevent conflict. It's going to save money. It's going to save time. It's just a win-win-win. And again, that's for maybe middle-aged, older folks, and even for younger folks. Again, the big thing there is what happens to kids if mom and dad are gone or incapacitated.
What if? So run that what if experiment. What if you died? What if something happened? What do you want to happen at that point in time? It's your life. You did whatever. You bought the house. You built the business. You had the children. Now your last act. And that's the way my father always kind of viewed it. He just like, my last thing I get to do. I have my last My dad was kind of a controller, so he wanted to control everything and had a certain very clear vision of how everything should happen. And it is a chance to go out the way you want, to set things up the way you want. So it's, from their perspective, a final say in what happens. It certainly saves motion and tear and fights and time and everything else. Do you not prepare and not plan for this? And in the end, it's that kind of, maybe it starts the conversation I say is the last forbidden conversation in America. God knows we can talk about anything and everything these days. Fluid genders and 1,000,000 other things I never thought we'd ever be able to discuss in America here. Now we talk about it every day, all day. But do we ever talk about death? We can't use the word death. It's passing. It's got to be soft. It's barbaric. It's awful. We don't do funerals. We don't plan for things. I don't know. That's my own agenda that I got on after all this. And yet, having said that, you think I'm going to tell you today how I've prepared everything. I have none of this. Zero. So we need to stay on and talk. I saw it all. I see the need, but that's later. Yeah. I'll deal with this later.
One of the things too is that it's, I think, the anxiety leading up to it. Once you do it, in a sense, you forget about it.
Right.
You don't want to totally forget about it, because we want people to make sure that they keep their trust up to date. So when you create a trust, you create those schedules of husband's property, wife's property, community property. Things change over time.
Right.
You might gain real estate, lose real estate, sell assets. You're checking
like somebody, hate somebody, whatever. I don't know. Things can change, right? Yeah.
Assets grow in your personal account that you're holding, and you want to make sure that's kept up to date. So when you actually transfer ownership of an asset into the trust, we call that funding the trust. And so you do the initial funding, but over time, things may change, right. and you may change how you want your assets distributed. You may change who your successor trustee is going to be. You may add assets.
Might get divorced, might other sorts of things come out. Or people die who were somewhere in the schedule here. That happened in my late aunt's case, just a simple little insurance policy she had. She listed my mother. She'd never changed it. Well, my mother died way before she died. So I had to go through a rigmarole it wasn't a lot of money, but I had to go through a whole effort to know this person died. I'm number 2 on the list here. And I have to
let me give you another complication of that. Dad names mom as sole beneficiary of life insurance policy. Mm-hmm. Dad dies, mom dies. Then what happens?
Even worse.
Right.
Nobody.
And it's like there's no, oftentimes that will bump someone into probate because, well, there's no other beneficiary. So it's going into mom's estate, right? And if it's over that threshold,
right,
then it's going to probate. So there's good cause to stay in contact with your attorney. And I'll tell you something I see a lot of too, just in my real estate work, is that so I do a lot of title work, whether it's on the law side or my real estate broker side. And I can tell you, I am shocked at how many errors I find in title records.
Wow.
And unfortunately, sometimes those don't get found until the person passes. And then we go and go, oh, wait a minute. There's a lien on this property from 20 years ago that never got satisfied. And, it was 20,000, now it's 200,000. Right. And so, one of the things we can do, is run title searches for people. And I always do that when it's a trust administration, because we have to go right to the official records and determine if there's any, liens.
And I'm sure this has not happened often, but I've even read cases where there are people, because nobody pays attention to the titles, they go in and erroneously file some document and say, oh, this is partly my house now. There was some weird case out, I remember a couple of years, probably a sensational case, maybe it's overblown, but somebody basically stole the house because they changed the title and somehow got the court to buy this, and now the person finds out that they're selling this house or renting this house. I think they were renting it or something here. And people show up and, this is my mother's house. Who are these people? I rented it from this guy. He's the owner. I know I'm the owner. Where did this come from? And, all sorts of crazy, fraudulent things happening. They steal your identity. Why not steal your title?
Well, yeah, it's funny because you tend to think of a deed to a property as like a scroll on parchment that gets old, and here,
they blow off the dust and say, where is it? Let me read the line here.
Yeah. I mean, it's a piece of paper. Now it has to be notarized. So if someone's going to try to steal the property, they're going to have to either fake a notarization or get a notary, obviously, to do something illegal. But yeah, I've heard of people recording, fraudulent titles. And so, it's important to know. Also, I'll tell you, just because I do both sides, law and real estate, that a lot of people nowadays are getting reverse mortgages.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. Right.
And depending on the reverse mortgage company, it can be a little challenging sometimes to get the payoff information on that. And I will tell you that after a certain time, you'll get the notice, which I've seen come to clients, that says, let you know your property is getting ready to go into foreclosure. It's going to be auctioned. And I had one client, that things happened late, and we were the law firm due to trust administration. And then I was actually selling the property for the client, and it was a reverse mortgage, and the reverse mortgage company we didn't know this was going out of business. And they were being bought by another company. And I want to say it took 3 months, maybe 4 months, to try and get the payoff information. I got a great title and escrow company that I work with, and they were super helpful. But long story short, I had to find a buyer for that property within 2 weeks who would put up over $400,000 to pay off the reverse mortgage, so that we could sell the property and the decedent's children would get the money, as opposed to it was scheduled for auction. And we were able to basically pull it out, snatch it out of the teeth of the auction, get it sold. So kids wound up getting a pretty good chunk of money each. Whereas if it goes to auction, it's like you don't know what you're going to get.
Fire sale, you might get nothing out of it here. You might get half of what you think, right?
So I know today reverse mortgages are very popular, and they can be right for some people. It's not my industry, but there's just so many complications to it that it's so important, I think even more so today, to have a good law firm that has this breadth of knowledge and practice that can help you with all of that and give you peace of mind. That you don't have to worry whatever happens in the future. You're ready. Kids are going to be blessed. Spouse is going to be blessed, and everything's in order. And it's just a weight off, I think.
I think so too. So I got to find out. It sounds like you and I need to have a conversation as well here, because I put this off way too long, even though I've seen all the horror stories of all this stuff here, and I'm no better prepared than my parents were better. I'm no better prepared than everybody else we're moaning about here today. How do people find you? Where do they reach you? How do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I was going to say it'd be good if you choose to do it, because you probably could come back and share with your audience, hey, it wasn't that bad. Here's what I did. Here's my documents.
Yeah, right. Because I don't know. I ask myself all the time, why don't I do this? And I say, well, $2,500 is not a lot of money, but it's money, and I'll do it later. I'll do it next time. I think it's just I don't want to do it. I don't want to face it. I don't want to face my own mortality. I don't want to spend the time doing it. How much time does it take? There's some time I got to talk and think of this thing through, and you're going to point out other things I hadn't thought about. Is this you come in one session and write it out, or do multiple sessions? Are you my
Generally,
therapist for a while here while I figure all this stuff out and everything
yeah,
here?
whatever you need. Yeah. So generally, once we connect, you'll get sent a package, ask you to do the best you can, providing information for us. You send that to us. We look at it. We have a meeting with you, and then we draft documents, send them to you to review, make changes, and then we do final documents and have you come in for a signing. So it's not tremendously complex. We guide you through every step. You don't have to go do your own research or try to figure out what's this, what's that. We're always there for questions. And, I look at it like this. So, to me, it's like the way to motivate us, the older generation, is to think about our kids, right? We generally want to give as much to our kids as we can.
Exactly.
I say, if you pass or die, whichever term you like,
I'll stick with die. That's what's going to happen someday here.
either intestate, which, by the way, we didn't mention this. If you don't have a will, then your assets will go through intestate succession, which might be a topic for another conversation.
I don't even know what that is. Okay. Right. Oh, who's the successor? You got to prove who.
Well, you got to have someone nominate it. Court has to approve it. Yeah. So it's
more stuff.
Yeah, it's an issue. But I always say, if you pass and let's say there's $50,000 in your kid's pocket that you gave them or they're walking away with, you want them to walk away with that? Or do you want courts and attorneys to come along and pull $40,000 out of their pocket, which could have gone to your grandkids, which could have gone to their college, which could have gone to buy them a car? But do you want that to go to attorneys and courts, or do you want that to go to your child or your grandchild? I know that's a hard line, but you really have to think about it in those terms, because
I'll go too beyond that. It isn't just, I want them to get everything they can get and not waste it on attorneys and courts and other things and stuff here. I get that. It's a powerful argument. But I think it's also a certain about it control. We are all so individualistic these days, Americans more than ever, where it's all about me and I want to do what I want to do and nobody can tell me what to do. Left, right, and center. It's not just everybody's got this fierce independence here. This is your last gasp. This is your last decision. And do you want to be in control of it, or do you want to hand that control over to somebody else? So there's that feeling of control, of final say over your life and what happens, and the emotion of it. Do you really want to burden them with all this stuff? Do you want to start the fights? Do you want to start the disagreements? You know whether your kids don't get along, or this is where they're at. Do you want to bring all this back up again, or do you want to end it? And, we've all been there as parents. I know lots of parents struggle with, I get along with my daughter, but not 100% perfectly all the time here, and do we want to bring up, oh, well, that reminds me you did this 20 years ago, Dad. And it's like, well, really, we're going to go there about this? And all of this is, it's an emotional period, and you can make it worse or you can make it better.
Yep. So you can reach us. I think you want that information.
Please. We're out of time. No.
It's a Hiskey Law Firm, Hiskey, Hiskey Law Firm. You can reach us at 714-961-1198. Again, it's 714-961-1198. My email address is M for Mark, just the letter M, last name Fitter, F like Frank, Itter, mfitter@hiskeylaw.com. You can even look me up. Just look up Mark Fitter, Google my name, and you'll find me there too.
And last pitch, why go to you? Why not just go to any attorney? Anybody is empowered to do this, but do they do this all day long, and do they really know what they're doing when it comes
I think what you want to look for is someone who obviously specializes in estate law. And I think what makes us different is our background. Again, my background in as a pastor and a hospice chaplain, counseling people through life's changes, and then also our breadth of practice, because we practice real estate law, business representation, which a lot of people own businesses, and estate law. You can pretty much do virtually everything under one roof, dealing with one attorney. And again, if property has to be sold or you want property sold, I can do that as well with my broker's license. So it's kind of all under one roof, dealing with
one-stop shop. Who doesn't want that? All right, give it to us one more time, and then we'll go out. The name of the company it's not your name, but it's another name. It is
right. Hiskey Law Firm, Hiskey, Hiskey Law Firm, 714-961-1198, or Google my name, Mark Fitter, Markfitter, and you'll find us.
Well, I'm glad we found you, and stay on after we hang up because I am going to talk to you about this because maybe this is the moment we start the conversation that I put off way too long here. So hang
Sure.
on. Thanks for coming on today here. And if you can talk me into this, facing the unfaceable here, maybe we'll have you come back and talk about it. It wasn't so bad.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
we'll find out. All right. Thanks so much for joining us today, Mark Fitter, and on a topic that nobody ever wants to hear. But if I advertise this, hey, come on, we're going to talk about estate planning. Oh, boy, everybody wants to rush and do that one. Or we're going to talk about end of life. We're going to talk about what happens after you die. No, later. But that's a conversation that I see the need. I've seen the other side of it. I've been through it now 3 times, mom, dad, and aunt. And boy, the more prepared you are, the better. There's a lot to deal with at that moment, so don't add to it. Thanks for joining us, Mark Fitter. Well, there you have it. One more reason to tune in each and every time. I should tune in. I'm the one that talks about all this stuff. Why haven't I done anything about it here? Let's find out if I do. Right here in Health Talks with Dr. Trinh. Streaming live from our studios here at the University of California, Irvine's Beale Applied Innovation Center.